The pattern has been established time and time again. We see some once trusted institutions and some we never really should have trusted in the first place capitulating to Donald Trump. What is the result of such capitulation? Well, on the one hand, it increases the likelihood that other organizations will also have to capitulate, right? It increases the likelihood that the kinds of organizations we're talking about, whether it's corporate media or white shoe law firms or our institutions of higher learning, will have to capitulate even more. That's what happens when you allow yourself to be blackmailed. What else is happening here, though? Well, our First Amendment rights, our right to free speech, are being eroded. When it comes to compromising standards to please a fascist leader, Paramount has been leading the charge. Most recently, CBS once again altered its journalistic practices in response to a complaint from the current administration, which is not how it's supposed to work. The National Desk has a report on the incident that set these events in motion. Take a look.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem now calling out CBS News. She is accusing the network of editing a recent interview to, quote, whitewash the truth about alleged MS-13 gang member Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The National News Desk, Jeff Harris, joining us. So the allegations here, Jeff, stem from Noem's interview on Face the Nation. That was on Sunday. Tell us more about her claims.
So during her interview this weekend, Noem was asked why the Trump administration was working to deport Abrego Garcia instead of forcing him to face charges in the United States. She says CBS intentionally edited the interview in a certain way that covers up the truth. Now, in the clip that aired, Noem said that prosecution decisions are always made by the DOJ and Attorney General Pam Bondi's department. So they will let them do that, although Abrego Garcia does have criminal charges pending, adding they will do everything they can to make sure he doesn't walk free in the U.S. Noem says they edited out the rest of her answer there, so she took to X to share a video of her uncut response.
The one thing that we will continue to do is to make sure that he doesn't walk free in the United States of America. This individual was a known human smuggler, a MS-13 gang member, an individual who was a wife beater.
In response to these allegations, a spokesperson for CBS writing here, quote, Secretary Noem's Face the Nation interview was edited for time and met all CBS News standards. The entire interview is publicly available on YouTube, and the full transcript was posted earlier this morning on CBSNews.com.
Nobody should have to look at two images of Kristi Noem at the same time. Much more importantly, however, why did they cut out the rest of her response? Because everything she said was a lie. And did the reporter fact check it in real time? I don't know. But apparently there's a full YouTube video that I can look at in order to find that out. According to a CBS News spokeswoman, quote, Face the Nation will now air only interviews that are conducted live or are pre-recorded with no cuts or edits. This extra measure means the television audience will see the full unedited interview on CBS, and we will continue our practice of posting full transcripts and the unedited video online, unquote. I mean, that's fine as far as it goes because transparency and all, but there are a couple of problems here. First of all, there's nothing wrong with editing videos for length, clarity, and flow. It is done all the time. It makes them more watchable, quite frankly. And this is just another way that Paramount is capitulating to the Trump regime. How did we get here? Well, remember Donald complained that 60 Minutes had edited its interview with Kamala Harris to make her look good and advantage her over him. And then he sued them for something like $100 billion. Many legal scholars agreed that the suit had no legal merit and would not have held up in court. Why did Paramount settle, though? They gave Donald $16 million. They essentially sent $16 million on fire to appease the toddler who was complaining that he hadn't been treated fairly by them, and then sued them in a frivolous lawsuit. Well, it turns out that Paramount had a merger opportunity with Skydance that needed federal approval that was certainly worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and they worried if they did not settle this frivolous lawsuit with Donald, he would let the merger go through. So many viewed that exorbitant settlement as an attempt to buy Donald's approval. so the FCC would sign off on Skydance's acquisition of Paramount. The ploy seemed to work because the deal went through. Before we go on, we have to do everything to protect Americans' right to free speech as it is enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution. So please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel if you believe in our mission. CBS has already sold its soul to Donald Trump, but here's the thing. He's going to keep asking you to pay. And we see this now by their changing journalistic practices to fall in line with the demands of the fascists. When it comes to appeasing Donald, the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, has been working overtime, and it's hard to believe, but it's actually getting worse. They are not only compromising their journalistic practices, but the New York Times also reports that CBS News has appointed Kenneth R. Weinstein as its new ombudsman to review complaints about news coverage. Weinstein is a conservative policy figure and former head of the right-leaning think tank, the Hudson Institute. This man has no newsroom oversight experience whatsoever, but he is skilled in one particular way. With his decades of involvement in neoconservative strategy circles, a record of donations to Republican causes, and a history of criticizing CBS's reporting, he is a prime Donald Trump sycophant. The move to employ Weinstein has been seen as fulfilling a pledge by Paramount, CBS's parent company, made to the Trump regime during the Skydance merger approval. In other words, appointing Weinstein to this position equals continuing the capitulation of CBS, Paramount, to Donald. CBS has stooped so low here that I don't think there's any coming back. Are other networks going to hold the line, or are the other networks going to see that there is an expediency to giving in ahead of time? Or, as Timothy Snyder says in his book on tyranny, the number one rule, don't obey in advance. Well, guess what? All of these people, all of these corporations are more than happy to do so to protect their bottom line. Sadly, but not surprisingly, the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court is up to its old tricks. In a complete dereliction of duty, Chief Supreme Court Justice John Roberts has just signaled a new way in which he is going to let Donald do whatever he wants. CBS News has the latest, and hopefully it is journalistically accurate reporting.
Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts is allowing President Trump to remove a member of the Federal Trade Commission. The firing of Rebecca Slaughter will remain in effect for now while the court decides whether to take up the case. CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, it's great to see you. You know, most Americans don't spend a lot of time worrying about who sits on the Federal Trade Commission. So can you explain the overarching significance of the Supreme Court saying, yes, this is a quasi-independent agency, but President Trump can potentially remove the Democratic commissioner anyway?
You did most of the work for me there because you teed this up exactly. One, we should note that this is just an administrative stay. Chief Justice John Roberts has said, I want more briefing from Slaughter's attorneys by September 15th. So this isn't a final ruling on the merits. But you asked me basically about the big legal question we're struggling with. And I think it's, again, does the president have the power at its most basic level? But a little bit further down in more detail, does the president have the power to fire the heads of executive agencies? And as you correctly pointed out, these kind of quasi-independent executive agencies. And what the court is going to struggle with next term is the question of whether there can be any limits on the president's ability to fire people, or if the president can just fire people essentially at will. And if there are limits, then what are those limits? What does the president have to show? Does the president have to show, for instance, that there's malfeasance? And of course, we're having the same conversation with respect to Lisa Cook, who's a board member at the Fed.
In a recent report, the Associated Press's Lindsay Whitehurst elaborates on just how unprecedented this decision is. Whitehurst writes, quote, Monday's order is the latest sign that the Supreme Court's majority has effectively abandoned a 90-year-old high court precedent that protected some federal agencies from arbitrary presidential action. In the 1935 decision, known as Humphrey's Executor, the court unanimously held that presidents cannot fire independent board members without cause, unquote. This is the pattern we've been seeing time and time again. The Trump regime, or Donald Trump specifically, does something that pushes the boundaries and perhaps breaks the law or is blatantly unconstitutional. He or the regime gets sued. It goes through the courts, ends up at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court enters something called a shadow docket, in which they don't render a final decision, but they say, until we decide whether or not this action taken by Donald or the Trump regime is unconstitutional, we are going to let him continue to engage in this potentially unconstitutional behavior. It is insane. It is not the way Supreme Courts should be functioning. John Roberts has abandoned all independence. He's abandoned all of his responsibilities to protect and defend the Supreme Court of the United States of America. He has caved into the far-right faction of his court, especially including Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas. He has failed this country in a way that hopefully will go down in history accurately. He seems to have as his agenda not only eradicating voting rights for many Americans, but also destroying the regulatory state, and in this instance, creating a unitary executive, an imperial executive that is wholly absent from the Constitution and is in fact entirely contrary to the principles upon which this country was founded. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.